Hi guys, and welcome back to another little watercolor piece. So today, as you can probably tell, I'm working in a different orientation than I normally do. So this one's really unique to the way that I normally work, but I decided to turn this piece just a little bit. So I'm working on a diamond shape instead of a square shape for the canvas, for the watercolor paper that is. And it was really surprisingly refreshing to work this way. So I always work in a rectangle or sometimes a square, but it always has a certain continuousness with the way that I have to work with the composition. There are things that I have to take into account on how it fits with the composition. If I'm working horizontally or vertically, it changes things, but pretty much with each one, there's always a certain sameness that I have to think about when I'm tackling how it interacts with the shape of the canvas itself. So this one was kind of a breath of fresh air. It was really unique and different to work that way, and it was like seeing something with fresh eyes. And I definitely recommend you try this out, working in a different orientation than you normally do, because it really did just add a new level of how I was designing the composition and how I was adapting the sketch to go with a design that was diamond shaped. It was really refreshing. I'll say that. It gave me a new look on it, and I just had a lot of fun adapting it. And I say adapt because I didn't actually originally plan on it being a diamond shape from the sketch. If you follow me on Instagram, I posted the original sketch there, and it's more like a vignette with the way that I designed the bottom of the character and how her hair wrapped around it. And then when it came time to transfer it onto my watercolor paper, it was just feeling kind of stale. And when I was looking at it as this free floating vignette inside of this piece, or on the paper that is, I was just not feeling it. I was feeling kind of bored with it. And that's when I decided to shift the paper and just give it a different shape that I had to fit it into. And immediately that made me feel a lot more interested with it and not so stagnated when I'm looking at it. And I find that sometimes when I'm feeling that way, just so uninterested in a piece, if I try to change something about it, if I switch it up so it's unique and different, it's a new technique that I'm trying out or a new color palette specifically meant to challenge me, I find that it almost instantly fixes that motivation that I have to work on that piece. It makes me excited about it and more interested in it. And I think overall, that's really what the value of art is, and getting better at art and trying out new things, is that it always, or many times, it makes you feel more connected with that piece and more excited about the progress of it, rather than just begrudgingly working on something and cranking it out and getting it finished. So it's something that I don't always think about in all of my pieces, but I definitely think about it when it's a piece that I'm right from the beginning feeling really bored about it, and I'm not really sure why, because in the sketch phase I was feeling interested about it. So it is something that I'd like to be a little bit more proactive with in all of my pieces as well, as far as pushing boundaries, trying new things, and pushing the techniques that I'm trying on each of my pieces. And I found that I was spending more time on figuring out the color palette for this one than I normally do, especially for a piece that's not that complex like this, where it's smaller and there's not a lot of elements. In the end, there's just not a lot that I have to work around to make the color palette work correctly, to read the way that I want to. So usually these come together pretty quickly, because there's so many options of being able to get the look that I want and the feel that I want quickly and easily. And this one, I struggled a little bit, or I don't think struggle is necessarily the right word. I just spent a lot more time thinking it through than I normally would. I originally was thinking through options of having it be this light blue background sky and have her wing just like very white. But in the end, I went through several iterations of color palettes and color comps, and finally I got to the point that I got to this one where I have a very dark night sky behind her, and I really like that. I like that it has that deepness to it. I don't think that I've done that in a long time, at least with the sky. I tend to do a lot more colorful things where they have a certain amount of brightness to them. But this one, I liked the idea of having a very dark atmosphere that she was in, and she was just there, part of it. And some of her pops out a little bit, but her dress is also pretty dark value. And that is something that I did make sure that I planned it out where her hair is a lighter value and her dress is darker. So if her hair wasn't framing that dress, her dress would have just completely gotten lost in the background. But I made sure that there would be distinction between it. So there's a dark background, light hair, and then a dark dress again. And I found that when I have a pretty limited color palette like this, lately I've been really enjoying incorporating very light touches of other colors in there that add a lot more interest to it. They're really pretty subtle, but I love the effect that it has. So like for her skin, there are certain areas that I added much more red to it so that it has that strong pigmentation to it. Most of her skin is very blue, but I have this red in there. And for a long time, that's something that I would totally avoid. I would be very centered on the color itself that I was using, and I wouldn't stray very far from the colors that I was using in a limited color palette, or if I was using an analogous color palette like this one is, I wouldn't go much farther from that. But I found that when I incorporate these little sparks of other colors in there, it adds enough interest that it no longer feels stark or plain like an analogous color palette can be, or almost like it's not. I find that when I work in very analogous color palettes, sometimes it can almost remove it from reality in a way. It feels too pared down, too small of a color palette for it to really be real. And when I add these little sparks of different colors of where there might be reflected light from something else, or something had rubbed on it, or it had been stained, just anything like that that adds just that hint of a different color, I feel like it broadens the world that this analogous color palette is in, if that makes sense. It feels like it's part of something that can have more color, and what you're looking at right now just has very little variety in that. And I find that I really like that. I really like the hints of the story to it and the hints of the color in it, while still being very closed in the colors that I'm actually using. That's kind of something similar that I end up doing with her dress, which I'm not sure if I've quite gotten to that point, but I am using my Cintiq. I have a silver and gold palette, and that's what I use for the metallic details on this one. But I initially thought about just doing silver, which would be very cohesive with the color palette that I have now, where it's just purple, blue, and a gray color. So silver would be gray. But in my testing of the color palettes, I ended up going with having silver, and I have a silvery gold and also a more gold color. And I love the effect of that, where it just wasn't the stark color there, but the variety of different golds in it, especially cool golds, because they did end up meshing pretty okay with the color palette that I had going on without being too stark, too gold, too warm in this kind of environment. But it was warm enough that it added more interest and variety to the colors that were there. And I do think that it adds a little bit more life to it, especially since it is a little bit more complementary of the purple color. So it does pop off, but it's still a very silvery gold. So it still meshes. I really like that, because it is something that typically I would not have made that decision. I would have been very closed in. I would have done just the silver. So it's fun to be able to see these decisions that aren't typical of how I normally work, but to be really happy with the results. And then I go in with my white gel pen like I usually do, but I had a lot of fun with outlining different areas on this one. So a lot of times I like to go around the figure or the main object of the painting with this white gel pen, especially when it's against a dark background, just to really make it pop. I love the look of that. But with this one, I also went around interior shapes as well, like the bottom of her arm, as well as the outline of her wings where it overlapped her hair. I like that it really added a lot of definition to it, which I like that it's in almost a graphic way. It's not realistic in any means, but it gives it a lot of pop and interest, and I just had a lot of fun with that. I think it's something that I'd like to push more in the future and be a little bit more aggressive with where I'm placing these kind of borders. I know that I mentioned this before, but I'd really like to get more different colored gel pens like this one, so that I can go in with not just a stark white, but ones that might fit with the color palette a little bit better and blend a little bit more harmoniously, so that I can be more fitting with when I add these outlines, especially when I'm putting them in areas where it's more integrated with the figure itself. So yeah, I'd like to get more of those. I'd like to try those out more in the future, but I love being able to add that kind of a detail in these paintings. And then I just added some little dark gray dots as well as metallic and white dots in the background. And eventually, I actually do this off screen for some reason, but I do add a little tiny crescent moon above her head. I like details like that add a little bit more structure to an area, especially for the background where when it was just a bunch of dots, it could have been stars or it could have been something more abstract. And I'm okay with things like that, but I like when you put one detail like this little crescent moon, it instantly makes it into a sky. It gives it a purpose to it. So I'm glad I added that. I think it helped finish off that area. And that is it for today. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will be back on Saturday with my next piece, which will actually be a redraw of one of my pieces from last year. And I do have a link in the description that will take you to my art shop. I will be selling this original piece of artwork, so if you'd like to check that out, I do have a listing down below. And I think that's it. So I'll see you guys on Saturday. Thanks again for watching. I'll see you then.